Part 1: A Marriage Built on Lies. The wedding dress felt heavy against my skin. Not because of its weight, but because it didn't belong to me. None of this did. I stared at my reflection in the mirror, a stranger wrapped in lace. The veil hung over my face like a ghostly reminder I was stepping into a life that had nothing to do with love. Outside, the wedding march began to play. The doors would open any second. My hands curled into fists around the bouquet, nails digging into the soft petals. Everyone in that grand hall was waiting for me to walk down the aisle, waiting to see the woman Damon Westwood had chosen. They all thought this was a fairy tale. They thought I was the luckiest woman alive. They had no idea. I wasn't the love of Damon's life. I wasn't his first choice. I was a placeholder. A stand-in for the woman he truly loved, the one who had left him in a fit of rage, running to another country, expecting him to chase after her. But he hadn't. Instead, he had turned around. And married me. Not for love. Not for companionship. For revenge. And I had let him. 3 years. That's how long I had played my role as Sophia Westwood, the wife of a man who never looked at me the way he looked at her. Alicia. Her name was like poison, lingering in every corner of our home, in every unspoken word between Damon and me. He never said he loved me. Never whispered sweet nothings into my ear. But he did those things for her. During interviews, his voice softened when he spoke about her. During filming, they were inseparable, laughing, whispering, touching. I was nothing but an accessory, a name on a marriage certificate, a woman trapped in the shadow of their never-ending love story. But I never complained. I never fought back. I smiled for the cameras. I played the perfect wife. I cleaned up every scandal and rumor, made excuses for his late nights, his cold demeanor, his lingering glances at another woman. I was patient. I was silent. Until I wasn't. The pregnancy was a mistake. I hadn't planned it. Hadn't wanted it. And I certainly hadn't told Damon. When the doctor confirmed it, I felt nothing. No excitement, no joy, only dread. I knew what this child would mean. A permanent tie to a man who didn't love me. A child who would grow up knowing their father's heart belonged to someone else. I couldn't do that to myself. I couldn't do that to the baby. So, I made a choice. I ended it. And for the first time in our marriage, Damon reacted. When he found out, his fury was unlike anything I had ever seen before. His hands trembled as he slammed the door behind him, his voice low and sharp like a blade slicing through the air. Why? I met his eyes, calm, unshaken. Because I don't love you, I said, my voice steady. The person I love is your dead brother. Damon froze. The air between us turned suffocating, thick with disbelief. Then, something inside him broke. For the first time in 3 years, he looked at me. Not as his wife, not as the woman he tolerated, but as something else entirely. And in that moment, I knew, this was just the beginning. Part 2: The Return of Alicia. Damon didn't say a word after my confession. He simply stood there, staring at me as if I had torn something vital from inside him. And maybe I had. His eyes, usually cold and distant, darkened with something unreadable. Then, without another word, he walked out of the room, leaving behind a silence so thick it felt like the walls were pressing in on me. That night, he didn't come home. And the next morning, the news broke. Alicia was back. I first heard the whispers when I arrived at an event with Damon. We were barely a step inside the venue when the air shifted. Eyes darted toward us, but not in the usual way they did when we walked into a room together. There was something different this time. Something expectant. I followed their stares and saw her. Alicia stood at the center of the crowd, a glass of wine in hand, dressed in a shimmering red gown that clung to her like a second skin. She looked untouched by time, as radiant as ever, as if the last 3 years had never happened. And Damon? His body went still the second he saw her. I felt it before I even looked at him, the shift in his breath, the way his fingers twitched at his side. For 3 years, I had never once seen him falter. Not for me. But for her? His jaw clenched. His grip tightened around the glass he held. And then, as if drawn by an invisible force, he moved toward her. I should have stopped him. I should have said something, done something. But I didn't. Because for the first time in 3 years, I wanted to see it. I wanted to see exactly how much she still meant to him. And what I saw confirmed what I had always known. Damon Westwood had never been mine. She played her role beautifully. She didn't rush to greet him. She didn't throw herself in to his arms. No. Alicia knew better. She let him come to her. And when he finally reached her, she looked up at him with wide, vulnerable eyes, just enough sadness, just enough hesitance. Damon, she whispered, voice barely audible over the chatter around us. That was all it took. A single word. A single breath. And just like that, the world around them disappeared. I watched, frozen, as his expression softened, something I hadn't seen in years. He reached for her before he could stop himself, his fingers grazing her arm in a way that felt too intimate for a man who had a wife standing just a few feet away. The room felt too loud, too suffocating. My pulse pounded in my ears. A waiter passed by, and I grabbed a glass of champagne, downing it in one go. I needed to remind myself of something. I knew this would happen. I had always known. But that didn't make it any easier to watch. They talked for a long time. I should have walked away, should have spared myself the sight of them slipping back into each other's lives as if I had never existed. But I didn't. I stood there, watching, memorizing every detail. The way Damon leaned in, hanging on to her every word. The way Alicia bit her lip, her voice trembling just enough to make him soften. The way his fingers brushed her wrist, his touch lingering. It was all happening right in front of me, and no one seemed to care. Or rather, they cared about something else entirely. Because while Damon was focused on Alicia, everyone else was focused on me. They were waiting. Waiting to see how I would react. Would I storm out? Would I cry? Would I make a scene? I did none of those things. Instead, I smiled. I let them believe I was unaffected. Let them whisper their cruel words behind my back. She's just a stand-in. She'll never be Alicia. Damon's only with her out of obligation. They weren't wrong. But they didn't kn the full story either. Because while they were busy watching me, they didn't see the way Damon's hands clenched into fists whenever Alicia mentioned needing money. They didn't notice how she subtly mentioned her family's bankruptcy, her voice laced with carefully placed sorrow. And they certainly didn't hear the way Damon finally broke, his voice quiet but firm. Alicia, don't do this. She looked at him with wide, tear-filled eyes. Do what? Make me choose. His voice wavered slightly, as if he already knew the answer. And she smiled. Because she knew too. She had already won. I don't remember much after that. I don't remember how I got through the rest of the event, How I smiled and made conversation as if my world hadn't just shattered in front of me. All I knew was that when I got home, Damon wasn't there. And by the time morning arrived, the internet had exploded. Alicia had posted a picture. A single, damning picture. Two hands clasped together. One of them unmistakably belonging to Damon. The caption was short, simple. "You said you'd never hold anyone else's hand again." It was all the proof the world needed. My husband had gone back to her. And this time, he hadn't bothered to hide it. The backlash was immediate. Fans rushed to Alicia's side, celebrating the reunion of a couple they had always believed belonged together. Some weren't as supportive. They reminded Damon of me. Reminded him of the woman who had stood by him for 3 years, who had fought his battles, cleaned up his messes, shielded him from the worst of the public's judgment. But Damon didn't respond. Not to them. Not to me. Instead, he did something worse. He retweeted her post. And beneath the picture of their intertwined hands, he wrote, "It's me." With 2 words, he shattered every lie we had built. He confirmed everything. There was no more pretending. No more coverin'. G for him. No more fixing the mess he made. Because now, I wasn't his wife anymore. I was just the woman he had used and discarded. The calls started flooding in. Our managers, the companies we had endorsement deals with, everyone was panicking. Our marriage was a brand. A business. And now, it was a scandal. I ignored the calls for as long as I could, but eventually, I had to face it. I had to do something. So, I did what I had always done. I protected him. I scrolled through my phone, looking. G for any picture of us that I could use to convince the world we were still together. But there were so few. And in the ones I did find, I was the only one smiling. In the end, I posted an old photo, Damon sitting under a lamp, reading a book. The lighting made him look soft, almost dreamlike. People wanted to believe the lie, so they did. Damon is home with his wife. Fans rushed to defend me. They attacked Alicia, calling her shameless, accusing her of stirring up drama. For a moment, it almost worked. Until Damon responded. He retweeted her post again, making it clear. "It's me." He didn't just expose my attempt to save face. He destroyed it. For her, he abandoned me completely. The next morning, I was summoned to the company to handle the PR crisis. And that was when I saw her. Alicia. Standing beside Damon. Like she had always belonged there. She turned to me with a small, apologetic smile. "I'm so sorry, Sophia," she said sweetly. "I got drunk and posted nonsense last night. I've already scolded Damon for getting so worked up. He's so focused on me that he didn't even think about you." She tilted her head, eyes twinkling. Such a clueless man, right? I smiled back. I wasn't angry. I wasn't hurt. Because I had already decided. I was done playing this game. Damon could have Alicia. Because I was about to burn everything to the ground. Part 3, The Breaking Point. The moment Alicia reached for my hand, I knew exactly what she was going to say. "Sophia, you're still wearing my wedding ring," she murmured, her voice soft and laced with false innocence. "Shouldn't you give it back to me?" For a second, I did nothing. Then, she reached out, her fingers grazing mine. As she tried to take it from me. A slow burn ignited inside me. For 3 years, I had endured this. The whispers, the rumors, the blatant disregard. I had smiled through it all. But today? Today, I was done. My arm swung before I could stop myself, my wrist colliding with her reaching hand. The motion wasn't aggressive, I wasn't trying to hit her. But Alicia gasped, stumbling back dramatically as if I had slapped her across the face. The room fell silent. I barely had time to process what was happening before she retaliated. Her purse swung at me, the metal clasp slicing across my forehead. Pain exploded in my skull, white-hot and sharp. The impact sent me staggering backward, my ears ringing. Warm blood trickled down the side of my face. Alicia covered her mouth, eyes wide with fake remorse. "Oh my God," she whispered. I didn't mean to. The act was perfect. Anyone watching would have thought I had attacked her first. I clenched my fists, swallowing the bitterness rising in my throat. She wanted me to lose control. She wanted me to be the villain in this story. And for the first time in my life, I wanted to give her exactly what she was asking for. I stepped forward, prepared to rip the ring from my own finger and shove it down her throat. But someone grabbed my wrist. Damon. His grip was firm, his touch burning against my skin. His voice was low, dangerous. "Sophia," he warned, his fingers tightening. "Dare to touch her, and see what happens." I froze. My pulse pounded in my ears, drowning out the sounds of the room around me. I turned to face him, expecting his usual cold detachment. But when his gaze fell on the blood on my face, he stilled. Something flickered in his expression, hesitation. Alicia seized the moment. She stepped closer, her voice trembling with just the right amount of emotion. "Damon, she called me a homewrecker," she murmured, her lower lip quivering. I tried to walk away, but she sniffled, tilting her head slightly as if afraid to meet his gaze. Damon's frown deepened. He glanced between us, his jaw tightening. Then, he reached out and patted her head. Like a parent comforting a child. "You did the right thing," he said. "If someone hits you, hit them back. As long as I'm here, you don't have to apologize to anyone." A sharp, unbearable pain lodged itself in my chest. I had always known who he would choose. But somehow, hearing him say it out loud still hurt. I should have walked away. I should have left before I said something I'd regret. But instead, I laughed. Loud and bitter. The sound must have startled Damon because his gaze snapped back to me, his brows knitting together. I turned to Alicia, my voice sickeningly sweet. "Don't worry about being called a homewrecker," I said, still smiling. "Just IGN. Or it." For a split second, her mask slipped. Her eyes flashed with something sharp and furious. She hated that I wasn't falling apart. Too bad. Alicia's lips pressed into a thin line, but then she exhaled, her smile returning. She reached for my hand again, this time grabbing my ring finger. "Sophia," she said softly. "Give me the ring." I didn't hesitate. I ripped the ring off and placed it in Damon's palm. For a moment, he didn't move. The weight of the ring felt heavier than it should have, like something unspoken hung between us. But after a long pause, he finally reached out. And Alicia snatched it from him. She slipped it onto her own finger, but quickly realized it was too small. Her smile faltered. With a scoff, she threw the ring into the trash. "Forget it," she pouted, clinging to Damon's arm. "I don't want a ring that's been worn by another woman. It feels dirty." I should have been angry. I should have said something. But all I felt was tired. Damon's gaze was still on me. His eyes flickered with something uncertain, something almost regretful. "What do you mean you're all ready?" he asked in a low voice. He had noticed the hesitation in my words earlier. I met his gaze, my expression unreadable. Then, with a voice as steady as steel, I whispered, "I'm pregnant." Damon didn't speak for a long time. The room around us faded into silence, the weight of my words hanging thick in the air. I saw the way his fingers tensed at his sides, the way his lips parted just slightly, as if he was about to say something. But Alicia spoke first. She laughed. Laughed like it was the funniest joke she had ever heard. "Oh, Sophia," she purred, amusement lacing her voice. "That's adorable." My entire body went rigid. Adorable? I looked at her, my hands curling into fists. Alicia tilted her head, pretending to study me. "You expect us to believe that," she mused. "That you're carrying Damon's baby?" She let out a soft sigh, shaking her head. "I guess you really were desperate," she whispered. My breath caught in my throat. And then, she reached for my stomach. I reacted on instinct. I slapped her hand away, hard. Alicia gasped dramatically, clutching her wrist like I had broken it. Damon immediately stepped between us. His voice was low, firm. "Sophia," he warned. "Stop it." I felt something inside me snap. I stepped forward, my voice trembling with something dangerously close to rage. "I don't need either of you to believe me," I spat. "I don't need anything from you." I turned to Damon, my heart hammering in my chest. "You're free," I whispered. Alicia's eyes widened, realization finally setting in. Damon stiffened, his lips pressing into a thin line. Then, slowly, his expression shifted. He took a small step toward me, his voice barely above a whisper. "Sophia, don't do this." I smiled. But there was no warmth in it. "This was ever real," I murmured. "Not for you." "And now?" I exhaled, my shoulders finally feeling lighter. "It's not real for me either." Alicia grinned, her grip tightening on Damon's arm. Damon's entire body tensed. His hand twitched at his side like he wanted to reach for me, but he didn't. He wouldn't. And that was all the proof I needed. I turned away, my voice steady. "I'll send the divorce papers by morning." And then, without another word, I walked away. Part 4, A Love That Never Existed. I don't remember walking out of the building. I don't remember stepping into the cold air, or the way the city lights blurred in my vision. All I remember was the silence. Not the silence around me. Cars honked, people chattered, life moved on as if my world hadn't just shattered. It was the silence inside me that scared me the most. Because for 3 years, I had endured everything. The rumors. The betrayals. The humiliation. And now? Now, there was nothing left to endure. I had freed myself. But why did it feel like I had lost something, too? Damon didn't come home that night. I had already moved out of our house, but I still knew. Claire, my manager, kept me updated. "Are you sure you want to go through with the divorce?" she asked cautiously. There was a pause before she added, "Damon hasn't signed the papers." I let out a slow breath. Of course, he hadn't. He wanted to drag this out, just like he had dragged out our marriage. But I was done. Waiting. "I don't care," I murmured. "He'll sign them. Eventually." Claire sighed. "There's something else," she admitted. "Damon changed the security code at the house." My fingers curled into my sweater. "Did he?" I said softly. I already knew why. Because Alicia was back. Because he didn't want me there anymore. But I didn't care. Not about the house. Not about him. I only cared about one thing. The jade pendant. The last thing my mother had left me. The one thing in that house that mattered. And now, it was gone. The house was no longer mine. But that didn't stop me from going back. I stood outside the front door, hesitating for only a second before typing in the passcode. The screen blinked red. Incorrect. I tried again. Red. I closed my eyes, my chest tightening. A few months ago, I had been his wife. Now, I was nothing more than an outsider. I took a slow breath, then called Damon. I should have known he wouldn't answer. Because when the call connected, it wasn't his voice that greeted me. It was hers. Alicia laughed softly on the other end. "Oh, Sophia," she purred. "Why are you calling Damon? Are you trying to come home?" I swallowed the lump in my throat. "Give me the passcode," I said, my voice steady. Alicia gasped dramatically. "Why would I do that?" she mused. "Damon and I are out right now. He took me to see the meteor shower." "Isn't that sweet?" Meteor shower. The same one I once told Damon about. The one I had whispered to him about on a cold night, telling him that couples who watched it together would stay together forever. He remembered. But not for me. For her. My grip on my phone tightened. "I don't care where you are," I said coldly. "Just tell me where my mother's pendant is." Alicia hummed thoughtfully. "Oh," she said airily. "You mean that cheap little thing?" I felt my breath hitch. "Where is it?" I demanded. Alicia giggled. "I threw it away. The last piece of my mother, gone. I don't remember much after that. I must have hung up. I must have walked away from the house. But the next thing I knew, I was at the dumpster, digging through piles of garbage with shaking hands. Damon found me there. He didn't say a word at first. He just stood there, watching as I ran. Tikali searched. Then, finally, he knelt beside me. "Sophia." His voice was quiet. "Come on. Stop." I ignored him. I couldn't stop. Not until I found it. Not until I had something of my mother still with me. Then, finally, an old woman called out. "Sweetie," she said kindly. "Is this what you're looking for?" I turned around so fast my vision blurred. She held a small sandalwood box. And inside it, my jade pendant. But it was shattered. The second I saw it, something inside me broke, too. I let out a choked sob, my fingers trembling as I reached for it. Damon watched me carefully, then whispered, "I'll get it fixed." I laughed, but the sound was hollow. "Don't bother," I whispered. "It's already broken." Damon's face hardened. His hands curled into fists at his sides. "Every time you say it's okay," he muttered, "I swear, I want to strangle you." I turned to him slowly. Our eyes met. And for the first time I saw something. Real in his expression. Not arrogance. Not detachment. Desperation. He wasn't ready for me to leave. But it was too late. Because I had already left. Damon's phone rang. Alicia. Crying. Begging. "Damon," she sobbed. "I was trying to find you guys, but I got lost. There's a man following me, and I'm scared. I didn't even have to watch to know what he would do next." He hesitated for 2 seconds. And then he left. He ran after her. Just like I knew he would. And just like that, I was alone. Again. I exhaled, letting the weight settle in my chest. It was funny. After everything, after all the betrayals and the pain, I wasn't even surprised. Because in the end, Damon had always been Alicia's. He had never been mine. Not even for a moment. The next morning, I went to the hospital. I had an appointment. An abortion. It wasn't an easy decision. But it was the right one. I wouldn't let my child grow up as an afterthought. I wouldn't let them live a life where their father loved saw me on. Else. I made my choice. And as the anesthesia pulled me into unconsciousness, I whispered a name. Not Damon's. But his brother's. Because in the end, the only person I had ever truly loved was already gone. Part 5, The End of Us. Darkness. That's all I saw as the anesthesia pulled me under. But even in the darkness, he was there. Not Damon. His brother. Brandon. The boy I had once loved. The boy who had saved me. The boy who had died because of Alicia. And now, I was about to erase the last part of him that had ever touched my life, this child. I wanted to believe I was doing the right thing. That I was freeing myself. That when I woke up, I would feel lighter. But when my eyes fluttered open and I saw Claire sitting by my bedside, her face streaked with silent tears. All I felt was empty. Damon was looking for me. Claire told me that as soon as I disappeared, he went crazy. He called my phone, no answer. He searched our old house, I was gone. He even reached out to Claire, demanding to know where I was. But it was too late. By the time he found me, the baby was already gone. The first time I saw Damon after the surgery, he didn't say a word. He just stared at me, his face unreadable. Then, slowly, his eyes dropped to my stomach. His jaw tightened. His hands curled into fists. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, he spoke. You disappeared for half a month, just to do this? His voice was calm. Too calm. A terrifying calm. I didn't answer right away. Instead, I simply looked at him, meeting his gaze head-on. Then, with a voice steady and cold, I whispered. Yes. Damon didn't move. Didn't blink. Didn't even breathe. And then, suddenly, he laughed. A bitter, hollow laugh. Like he couldn't believe this was real. I was afraid you'd be upset, he muttered. So I traveled across the country to find the best experts to fix your jade pendant. His voice dropped. And this is how you repay me? I didn't flinch. Didn't waver. I simply looked at him and said, Damon, I never loved you. His pupils shrank. His breath hitched. And for the first time I saw it. The moment he broke. The moment he realized I had never belonged to him. Because the one I had loved was already dead. Damon refused to sign the divorce papers. Days passed. Then weeks. Then a full month. And still, he wouldn't sign them. He ignored every request. Refused to acknowledge them. But I wasn't waiting anymore. I had already made up my mind. And if he wouldn't let me go peacefully, then I would burn everything to the ground. Alicia's wedding was broadcast live. I watched as she walked down the aisle in a custom-made gown, her face glowing with triumph. She had won. She had Damon. She had everything she wanted. But just as she reached the altar, the internet exploded. A video surfaced. A damning video. Alicia. On a school rooftop. With Brandon. His final moments, captured forever. The truth revealed to the world. Damon watched the video in real time. At first, he was confused. Then his face paled. His hands shook. And by the time the video ended, Alicia was crying. Damon, she sobbed. Don't watch it, don't. But he had already seen everything. He had seen the moment Brandon died. He had seen the way Alicia had pushed him toward the edge. He had seen the way she had lied. And finally, he had seen the truth. Brandon's death wasn't an accident. Alicia had killed him. And now, the entire world knew it too. Alicia's wedding turned into a funeral. Reporters swarmed her. The internet canceled her. The police took her away. And as she screamed for Damon, reaching for him like she always had, he didn't move. He just stood there, staring at her like she was a stranger. A woman he had never known. A woman he no longer loved. And when she called his name one last time, pleading, he turned his back on her. Just like she had once turned her back on Brandon. Damon lost everything. His career. His reputation. His future. He was blacklisted. Abandoned. Forgotten. And one day, months later, he was spotted on the streets of a foreign country. Beaten. Mugged. Stabbed. The once untouchable Damon Westwood had fallen. And no one cared enough to save him. Brandon's grave had visitors again. For years, he had been alone. But after everything, people started coming back. They placed flowers. They whispered apologies. They said his name with remorse instead of forgetting him. But I never forgot. I never stopped visiting. And one day, as I sat beside his gravestone, watching the sunset, I smiled softly and whispered, "You still haven't heard it, Brandon." I traced my fingers over his name, my voice barely above a breath. I loved you. The story of Damon and Alicia ended in ruin. But my story? It was just beginning. And this time, I was finally free.